us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Thriving Forward, Embracing Change as Records and Information Managers. I am joined live by Susan Lamb, consultant at Infotaction, keynote speaker, and a whole lot of other achievements and accomplishments on her resume. But I wanted to just give maybe a quick minute or two for folks to roll in before we get started and I introduce Susan. But there are many of you who signed up today, and I think the topic has been resonating. If you want to drop in the chat where you are dialing in from, I saw a couple of folks outside of the US and across the country. And so it always makes it very fun to see which time zone people are dialing in from. So on today's agenda and housekeeping items, really quickly, if you are not aware of Gimmal, from sensitive data discovery to defensible disposition, we help enterprise and public sector customers simplify governance and more so elevate insights. From legacy ECM migrations to records management, we offer solutions across the lifecycle of records, data, and information together. Yes, we will be recording today's webinar, and if you'd like to participate during the live Q&A, please use the Q&A function. It makes it easier for us to see and respond to your question, but also feel free to engage and share any thoughts or feedback that you have in the chat. It's always really fun to see the conversations develop and the various questions and comments. So today's fireside chat is with Susan, founder of Know Your Information, consultant on Infotaction, and former managing counsel and data governance leader at Shell Corporation. Today, we'll be talking about how records and information management professionals can ride the wave of AI. Our roles have shifted, not just in our industries, but really across companies of all sizes, across all industries, public sector agencies, and some of the challenges, insights, and lessons learned that Susan herself has managed and navigated throughout her 24 years at Shell formerly. We'll also talk about some emerging trends and skills in today's environment, both from a mindset perspective and what I like to call power skills, because they're not soft skills in this environment. They are critical and necessary for success. And then, of course, we'll finish off with a live Q&A as mentioned and share some resources and upcoming events. So today's featured speaker, thank you, Susan. I am so happy that we were able to have this conversation live. Fun fact, Susan came up on my LinkedIn. I reached out to her and she happily said yes. And we got to connect at InfoNext in Savannah, Georgia last week. So I think, Susan, you'll be talking a little bit about having a good network and connections for a career, for navigating change and other topics today. But I wanted to turn it over to you because this fireside chat is really about your insights and experiences. And I would love to hear, how did you become group manager at Shell? How did you navigate 24 years at Shell, and what brings you to today in your journey, especially from information governance to now AI governance?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, isn't it? I'm not really sure I know the answer to that. So I suppose that's my first sort of caveat in health warming. I'm talking about, the things that I've done and where I think I've learned life lessons, and it will be mainly soft skills that I talk about. I suspect a lot of people on this call are much more detailed, know much more about technical record management than I do. So please accept this talk in that spirit. So everyone's putting in the chat where they're from. I'm from London, so I'm dialing in from the UK. In Savannah last week, some people did have a little bit of trouble understanding my accent. So I'm going to try and speak as clearly as possible. And obviously you can always put in the chat if you don't I'm really not making sense or you can't hear me. So where to start really? I mean, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I set my heart on that when I was in my early childhood, watched lots of legal dramas on the telly. I really liked the idea of being a lawyer, and I set out to do that. Unfortunately, I sort of had a bit of a hiccup at the first hurdle to go to law school, to go to university to study law. I had a big car accident when I was in my teens, and I had a bad injury. Anyway, I ended up having to go around the houses a little bit to qualify. I ended up doing a science degree, but I was so determined that that's what I wanted to do, and I ended up qualifying as what it's called in the UK as a solicitor. And yeah, so really enjoyed that. Really think the law is a great discipline, and it really was a great mental challenge, but also helping and driving, giving people advice, which is really where I was very happy to be. And then, long story short, after working in a law firm for a few years, I joined Shell. And around the time of, actually, around the time about 2003, I had just come back from maternity leave in my legal department in London. And Shell were at that point really looking hard at their record management program, and they wanted somebody to help with that. And gone back to work 3 days a week, and it's difficult for a transactional lawyer to work 3 days a week because clients want people full time. Anyway, I ended up doing records management in the legal function for Shell for about a year, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it because it was completely different. It was completely new. I was out of my comfort zone because it was much more about influencing and bringing about change than giving people advice. Or there obviously the advice element. And then there was a permanent role coming up for the first ever Shell Group Records Manager. And I tell this story because I think it's also a sort of lesson for all of us, really. The role was posted, and I looked at it and I thought, yes, that's great. Would love to do that. Except there's a couple of things on here I just can't envisage. I can't do those things. And my friend, a really good colleague, said to me, "You applying for that job, Susan?" I said, "No, I don't think so, because I can do sort of 80% of what's on this role description, but there's a couple of things I can't do. I could learn them, but I can't do them." And she said, "Actually, Susan, you're perfect for this role. You really should apply. And you shouldn't let the fact that there are a couple of things that you're not perfect at in your own mind to stop you moving forward." And well, yeah, I did apply for it. And actually, obviously, I got that role. But it was one of my a sort of really a lesson I really want to share with you, because I think we often in our own minds view our skills in a way that is really quite self-deprecating, and actually not as kind of in a perfect world as they should be. And actually, that's not the case. You should absolutely look at opportunities and view things on those opportunities as what you can bring to the party, rather than holding yourself back by the things that maybe you can't bring to the party. So that was really important. That's a really important thing I want you as record managers on the call today to really feel, because we've all got really great strengths because of what we do in this role. Well, I'll talk about those later. Well, I think I was thinking about this before I was preparing for this. Let's talk about what I think our skills are. But we also have gaps. But actually, we should lean into our strengths and our skills and manage the gaps, but really lean into them as much as possible, the strengths, um, um, because there are many. So yeah,
Y-
that's kind of how I came to be group records manager, Kim.
Yeah, I love that we were able to connect in person about this, because I think, for me, it will be hard to condense all 24
Mm,
years of lessons learned, insights, career pivots into just, a 1 hour webinar. And so we will share out resources and ways to keep in contact with Susan. But I think you bring up a good point around strengths. I think in times of change, uncertainty, complexity, I actually came from a psychology background, and during my session at InfoNext, I talked a lot about cognitive biases. And one of the human tendency to do during times of change is kind of reverting back to this essence of scarcity mindset. And you'll
Mm.
talk a little bit about different mindsets that people can take on as they navigate change. But scarcity mindset is the concept that as humans, we tend to focus on our lack of resources, lack of
Mm.
time, lack of
Yeah.
skills. I was thinking about this when you mentioned that, oh, I'm not qualified, or like, oh, I don't want to apply for it because I'm not perfect for the role. No
Yeah.
role is perfect. And I
Mm.
think one thing that we tend to focus on is, the scarcity part of it.
Yeah.
And you bringing up the fact that let's focus on the strengths, because this is the time for records and information managers to take the spotlight, not just as compliance police or,
Mm.
risk management folks, but really position ourselves to elevate information governance into insights generation or innovation. And the fact that the way we manage information is now just evolving so quickly, and now generative AI is rewriting the rules once again, and it's our time to shine. And talk to me a little bit about, how have you approached AI? How did you go from an information governance professional, data governance professional, and managing and navigating and guiding, shepherding organizations through AI?
Yeah, well, so much to say, Kim. I think we need another session actually, because you prompted so many things I would love to say. I mean, I think the first thing is, we've been here before, many of us, perhaps not those on the younger side of the call, but we, as the slide says, we were faced with, this change, big change, when we went from electronic records management from paper to electronic records management. And then we had this huge drive, definitely in Europe anyway, around privacy and how that was going to affect it. Other things that I've had in my career are things like cloud computing and how
Mm.
that's going to impact everything, records, electronic data, cross-border transfers, the list goes on. But the point is, we on this call are still here and or we are just starting off on this journey. So we as record managers have adapted. That's one of our key skills. I mean, I have got a long list here of skills I can read out, but I think our adaptability and our flexibility is one of our strengths. And absolutely, we should lean into those strengths and focus on them. And the same, and not be scared of this thing called AI that we're all worried about is going to really impact us. Because actually, for once, actually, in this situation, data is king. It's key. It's fundamental. And I just don't think people realize that just yet enough. I've been going on about it a lot on LinkedIn, but actually, I think it's that chicken is going to come home to roost, and it's the record managers, the information managers that have been curating and protecting and looking after that valuable data that people are going to turn to when they need their data for AI. And I think we should forestall that and actually go out and tell people, share our story wider. So I think we should actually be proactive and we should lean into this rather than be scared of it.
I love that you bring out fear, because as humans, of course, we're kind
Mm.
of naturally inclined to be afraid of what's next or be afraid of uncertainty. And um, I know when we first started chatting about this, I shared an expression that I learned a few years ago, FOBO, fear of becoming obsolete.
Yeah.
And it has a fun tie-in to rot data. A lot of us are dealing with that right now, fear of missing out on opportunities or fear of missing out on what's next. And so, but it's important to ground ourselves in reality versus the shiny new object here. And we're going to launch a quick poll question. And I wanted folks to kind of see what their peers or colleagues or other leaders, where in the journey they are. And it's not just something that we are saying to folks, but also seeing that your peers are also
Mm.
going through the exact same journey and you're not alone. And so I see some activity here. I'll share out the results a little bit, but I also want to note that AI has been around for a long time.
Mm.
I started my career actually in marketing automation about 11 years ago, right after graduating from grad school. And at the time, quote unquote, AI was much more controlled, it was much more contained. For those of you, for you, you went to law school. So the if then reasoning logic, right? The formulas for AI was much more simple. But now, especially with ChatGPT the last 2 years, now it's come into the public awareness, mass awareness. And I think there's a little bit of let's separate the hype from reality here. And okay, so let me share the results. How prepared is your organization for integrating AI into records management? And let's see the results. So
Mhm.
only 14% of folks already have or will be implementing an AI strategy.
Mm.
And most of you, 82%, are aware and or exploring AI. And so I want us to kind of ground ourselves in that and really make sure that we're not being motivated by fear, but more so motivated by excitement and a roadmap and framework, especially the 14% of you who have or implemented an AI strategy. That could be a great follow-up webinar for next time.
Mm.
And so now that we've established, where are folks in their journey, the majority of folks are still dealing with the basics of AI readiness. I think based on our conversations last week while we were in Savannah, and we also recently had a user group with our own customers, and where do I even start? That's been top of mind for folks. And you as a AI certified governance professional. Could you walk us through,
Mm.
this framework? I know that framework simplifies things, but in real life, it never works out as beautifully.
Yeah. Well, look, a couple of things I just want to pick up on. So, fear. I mean, well, I don't want people. I mean, fear is real, and we can't. I can't. I'm not. I really don't want people to think I'm saying, well, just get rid of your fear because it's not. I know it's not that easy. But I think you kind of, with every emotion that one has, you have to kind of feel it and understand it and be aware of it, and then really kind of look at, well, what is the fear? Is it fear of the change? Is it fear that I won't be able to tackle this because it's too difficult? What is the fear? And then, as I said, kind of try and lean into that and change it into a more of a feeling of excitement and curiosity, because I think, again, that's one of the things that is a real strength of us as record managers is our curiosity. We've needed to be curious to be able to to keep up with those laws on our retention schedules for a start. And I say that in a funny way, but that's true. So I think that I just wanted to make that clear. And then, so how did I get into this? Well, it's obviously everybody's journey is individual, and for me, it was a little bit about coming back into the law actually, because there's so much new legislation, including in the EU, the EU AI Act. I was fascinated by the legal part of AI, and so I wanted to learn the legal side. So I that's what got my curiosity. But as the other side of it was actually I was really interested in the data side as well. So, having done things with records and information for so long, how that linked not just with AI, but also with how that legal framework was going to fit around it. So that's why I decided, in terms of when I was coming up to making a career change, where I was going to sort of to use that awful word pivot or change my career. I thought, well, this is interesting. It ticks both boxes for me. It's both legally orientated, but it's also got data in it. It seemed like the perfect thing for me to go and explore. And so I did one of the IAPP qualifications. That's how I got into it. And I'd recommend that. But there is so much information on LinkedIn. It's very daunting, AI, but just pick the tiny little bit of it that you think you might find interesting to pique your interest. It might be the data, it might be the algorithms, it might be the law, it might be anything, and just start there. So yeah, so what we thought we'd do here is, from the perspective of a good AI governance framework. Some of you have already got one of these. I saw in there 14% of you, and some of you are working on it. So really, there are 10 pillars of a good AI governance framework. And you can see these. I don't need to read them out. And actually, the reason for me putting this slide in is not to read it out. This is not a webinar on on an AI governance framework. But what I think this shows is coming back to us as record managers and how we can, change, move, evolve into this area in our own, in the way that suits us and is authentic to us, is by looking at these pillars. There is so much scope to be able to drill into these pillars and find bits that interest you and which you can then maybe explore and start your journey into AI. And so, for example, here, I mean, and this is a good AI governance framework is pretty much the basis for any good governance framework, including data governance. Now, there are some frills and fancy things that you need to add on for AI, but actually, essentially, it's pretty much the same. You've got standards and policies, you've got an oversight, and you've got a risk management framework, and you've got, good old training and education and awareness, monitoring and oversight. I mean, those are all really basic things for what you've been doing probably in your information governance framework. So I say that because I want to give you comfort that this isn't you don't feel overwhelmed that this big mystery thing, AI governance, is going to be so completely different for what you've been doing already. So that's the first thing. And secondly, pick the bits of this framework that actually you might think are interesting. For example, as record managers, getting people to label records and do all that is training and awareness. And that might be something that from your own personality and your skills you're very strong at and very good at. Perhaps that's the role that you can play. For example, AI literacy is a big thing and it's going to be even bigger. It's basically making sure people understand AI. It's not about algorithms and large language models and how they work. It's about basic understanding across society about AI and its impact. Perhaps that's something in your organization you can help with. And then the final thing I want to say about this is one of the key things about AI governance is not to reinvent the wheel. It's about looking at in your organization where you've got all these things already and where you can leverage them. So a good example, for example, is around data privacy, personal data. Definitely in Europe, you have to do risk assessments, what are they called, DPAs, data privacy assessments. And those are what can be used to start doing your AI assessments. There, you can leverage that process, that template, or whatever you've got in your organization. Take it off the shelf and see. Okay, so we'll use that for our AI governance, or at least that's a starting point. So that's where you, as a record manager, can come in because often we have privacy responsibilities as well, but we definitely have data responsibilities. And you may know, and probably do know, how all that works in your organization better than most people. So, and the final thing I would say here, I think that was my final thing. I'll say one more, is that don't sit there and wait for this to happen for you. I would suggest you should reach out to people in your organization and ask some questions. Not in an accusatively way, not in an aggressive way, but in a really genuinely, so look, I've been doing data governance in this company for X number of years. I'd really like to help with AI. Where can I help? Offer your services in one of these areas that you think you could add value, build on your strengths, and actually might end up leading down a path and getting you into something which is beneficial both to you and your organization.
I love how you break this down, Susan. And two things that stood out is picking the bits and pieces where you can really shine. I
Hmm.
think for me, and some of our customers have also shared this as records managers, it's been hard for them to learn again because
Hmm.
they've been doing something and doing their role for X amount of years. And, we all get comfortable,
Yeah,
myself included. And so when
me
you
too.
say lean into the lean into the discomfort, but then also figure out where in this governance framework where you can really shine. Like for myself, I'm a non-technical person. I'm not a records manager, information manager by trade, but there are parallels as a marketer and a records manager where we have to talk to the board or my leadership to talk about metrics for auditing and education training and awareness. And I think when we share out and reach out, as you say, it really helps navigate change, but also creates a great support system. And I think this is a great segue for us to go into the next slide around mindsets and what people can do to build that resilience in times of change.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's very easy to come onto a webinar and say all these things. And so I understand. I mean, I've been there. It is difficult. So this is not about, solving world hunger and going and getting up. Right, that's it. I'm going to go into the managing director's office today, and I'm going to present on data governance. It's not. It's just little steps that you're comfortable with that maybe just push you a little bit out of your comfort zone. It's a bit about networking and reaching out, finding you probably know all the people in your organization that do all these things. And what would be really helpful, I've found with people in these situations, is you can probably link it all up together. Certainly, one of the roles I played in our organization when I was doing this was, oh, well, who does all these privacy assessments? Oh, well, I knew that because I kind of was helping them with the records management side. And then, oh, and who does risk and controls and stuff? Oh, well, it's this person. And actually, because you embedded such a lot and record management touches so many parts of the organization, that's, I think, one really big thing that you can do immediately. And it's not particularly stressful or challenging, but it's really helpful. So, and it's about not, how would they say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So it's not about, big gestures. This is about little things and doing what, but being proactive. And so I think coming back to record managers and their skill sets, I mean, I think we wouldn't be here if we weren't resilient. I mean, it is an absolutely, I mean, there's lots of jobs that could need resilience, but I think records management really does. Because as I've said for many years, it's not a particularly sexy subject, except for us. We love it, obviously. But I think it's great, but other people don't. And that's not their problem. That's just kind of how it is. But you get knockbacks, you get people, I'm not interested in that. Oh, I don't want to label my records. Oh my God, you're coming, it's a constant negativity. I mean, I definitely felt it very often. And so that resilience of being able, and we all, I mean, to be clear what resilience really is, resilience is about being able to come back after setbacks and hopefully come back even stronger, and we can build that muscle. Resilience is a muscle that you can build. It's not you're not set in stone, not built born with an X amount of resilience. You can actually build it. And so what we've got here, Kim, is like there's three on there and three in the next slide about how little things that you can do that all go to add to building resilience. So just to go through them quickly, reframe, and that's about seeing the positives in a situation. And I don't mean that Pollyanna, maybe you don't have that in the States, but that, oh my God, everything's wonderful
Yeah,
and
toxic
toxic
positivity.
positivity. It's not
Yep.
that. It's about every situation can be viewed in a really negative way or in a more constructive way. So it's about looking for that constructive part. And actually, what you find is because, again, another hobby horse of mine is neuroplasticity in our brain. Our brain actually learns to do that naturally if we force it enough.
Yep.
So reframing, control what you can control. I think that's quite obvious. There's lots of things we can't control. Change is one of those things. But focus on what you can. And it might only be as simple as turning up to work, or I'm going to have a coffee this morning. I can control that. It might even be that basic. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times in my life when it has been that little a thing that I think, oh, I can control. I'm going to do that. And then good connections, networking, social connections is so important. You might be an extrovert like me and kind of bound around in the world and think everybody's really friendly, or you can be an introvert. and maybe a little bit more restrained. Whatever you are, just having that little social connection and building that in your own authentic way is really key to resilience. What are the other
I
three,
love
Kim? Sorry,
Yeah,
Kim.
I love that you bring up extroverts because no one believes me, but I'm an introvert. And
Mm,
so when I came back from the conference, I had my own ritual of just decompressing,
yes.
just being by myself for half a day. But I think a lot of folks that I spoke to, and actually one of our former customers, she's now retired, she'll be on a panel in June, but she actually presented a session around how to network as an introvert. And
Mm,
if I could share a personal story of my own career, I actually started off thinking I wanted to become a lawyer. I worked at a law firm for a couple years, and realized it was not as fun as I thought it would be. I also didn't do too well in my LSATs, to be completely honest. But because I had reached out to help the marketing team, I was helping some of the lawyers get on LinkedIn at the time. This was, I don't want to date myself, 2010 or so. And
hmm
then found out that one of our clients, Discovery Communications at the time, they were looking for a role in corporate affairs, and I jumped over as a project coordinator. One of my biggest projects was to help folks and the entire company, but especially within my department, migrate from IBM Lotus Notes to Outlook. And
Yeah.
suddenly overnight, I started to quote unquote, make friends, and really, it was about just to show people how to use Outlook. And that felt good to me because I was
Mm,
able to manage my time, manage my energy, but also connect with people in a very meaningful way. And so, wanted to
mm,
bring that up because you mentioned, helping people and helping educate people to understand what you do and what records management is and what your role is within the
mm.
broader system is so important and related to the good connections and the good networking. But talk me through, the next three potential actions or tactics that people can make. We talked about the
Sure.
mindsets,
Yeah,
and now
just
let's
quickly,
put it
because
into
I do
action.
want to have time for the questions.
Yep.
Chunk, this is a kind of very, I don't know if this is a real one, but it's definitely a me thing. I find that when when I'm faced with overwhelming challenge in my life, I can't look into the future. I can't think, gosh, a week, a month's time, or I have to really. And some days, in the past, I've had to literally got through. If I get to the next half hour. My daughter was very ill in hospital when she was born, very ill. And I just got, if I can get to the next half hour, if she's, she's okay, and then what you find is it's like driving down a road with lampposts. If you can get to one lamppost and it becomes clear, then the next
Mm,
lamp, and what you eventually find is those lampposts get further ahead. So chunk the time into what can I just get through now for the next day, week, or whatever, that's a kind of very it's about looking at certainty again, I think.
yep.
And a positive view of yourself. I think I've kind of labored that one a bit too much. I mean, it's hard. We're all very self-critical. I'm a lawyer. I'm probably the most self-critical person ever, I mean, and we all want to think we I don't know, aren't perfect, and that's okay. But I think we have to also be. Little test I do is, what would you say to a friend when you have that little voice in your head saying, Susan, my God, you did that webinar and it was so rubbish. You wouldn't say that to a friend, would you? Don't talk to yourself like you talk to, don't talk to yourself like that. Talk to yourself like you talk to a friend, and then keep things in perspective. Easier said than done at times, but I think that is about controlling what you can control. Little incident here recently with the garden fence, my fence boundary. Lady was getting very upset. She had to go to the doctor for her heart. And I did say to her, look, keep things in perspective. Your health and well-being is more important than what kind of fence your neighbor puts up. I know these things are important. I don't want to get, but it is a perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, a lot of folks kind of have to balance ambition versus action. Sometimes we think about growth or progress as 10 times growth or whatever
Hmm.
people are throwing out there. And there's a book called Atomic Habits, and
Hmm.
the author really promotes this perspective of 1% progress
Yeah.
daily. And sometimes, you can't even do the 1%, but that's
Mm.
okay because compounded over time, it
Yeah.
then becomes it's 10%, 20%, or whatever other percent. So we are going into our pre-submitted question portion of the webinar. Thank you so much, Susan. I know, again, just keeping mind of time here, but I think we'll have to do a repeat of some kind or partner up on another discussion at one point. But someone asked, what is the number one skill which records managers should embrace in the changing landscape of federal government employment? I think this is
Mm,
very US based at the moment. But speaking of federal government employment, I think someone had also asked a variation of this question on a recent webinar where we hosted Mark Patrick, the Chief Records Officer at the US Department of Defense. And he talked about many different skills, not just a number one skill, but the skills that are historically have been positioned as soft skills, but are now power skills and necessary skills. You talked a bit about that, Susan.
mm.
Bringing people together, breaking down data silos, especially for those of us who are still grappling with legacy systems, um, especially in large organizations. Sometimes teams are not talking to each other, even across the aisle. So reaching over the aisle, cross collaboration, and communicating what records management is about and educating folks and making friends, building those relationships, I think is probably the number one skill. And we can drop in the chat too a recording of that webinar for folks who may or may not have watched it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that is obviously quite US specific. I mean, I'm going to go really, well, soft skills, to be honest. I mean, I think I would say look after yourself. I think, I obviously I don't know what's going on in your government employment, and so I gather it's quite tumultuous at the moment, and there's lots of job insecurity. So the best thing you can do is look after yourself and really make sure that your mental health and well-being is even you give priority. Now,
Mm.
again, that's easier said than done, but it is about putting your own life, your mask on, before you help others on the plane. You're not going to be able to navigate that environment of change. And maybe it will mean you need to look for another job, or you may need to upskill. You can't do any of those things if you're not putting your own mental health and physical well-being as a priority. And that's just got to be paramount. So I would suggest in these times we tend to deprioritize it. I know I do. And, your sleep goes and you get worried. So, just try and find that balance and look at the resilience skills and those things that you can do. So that's a sort of maybe soft, fluffy, generic answer to this, but that's kind of where I would go, Kim.
That's definitely important, especially I came back from a unexpected health leave recently, so health is wealth for sure. Next question is a little more technical. So what updates should records managers make to the records control schedule to keep pace with technological innovations that generate new types of records?
Mm. Yeah, quite a technical conversation question, and there's probably lots more people who can answer this better than me. So I'll give you maybe a different perspective. So one of the things that we did in terms of implementing our own life cycle management when I was at Shell is make sure our retention schedule was very very simple
Mm,
and big bucket. And so, in that sense, crafting the buckets quite widely and comprehensively helps when new things come up. So, for example, Shell would buy a new business or they get into a new market. And there were lots of like regulatory records relating to electricity companies, for example, that we weren't used to dealing with. But what we were able to do by looking at what those laws were was actually generally map them into a big bucket so that actually no change was needed, or at least the change was minimal. I think in one case we had to implement a new category. So that's a very pragmatic, non-technical answer, but just how a big corporation managing, records management across 80 countries that's the approach that we took. And if you want me to do a whole thing on retention schedule, happy to do that. But that's another seminar.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on that, we have a lot. I think you brought it up too, is not reinventing the wheel.
Mm,
Yes, right now, keeping pace with new innovations and new features. I think for myself, both having worked at and currently working for a solution provider, but also buying solutions, is sometimes we don't know what we already have in our tech stack. And actually, a couple of years ago, I went through an exercise where we decided to audit our tech stack and
mhm,
capabilities and really whittle it down first before we go out and buy other things. So I think it's, I like the analogy of whittling down our wardrobe, our closet
mhm,
before we go and buy, other things and say that we
mm.
have
I
nothing to
certainly need to do
wear.
that. Mm.
Right. So and actually this is fun because someone is newer to the field and
Yeah.
questions. So I am new in the field of records management and currently studying archives and records management. As such, we'll really appreciate more insights on this evolving portfolio.
Yeah, well, you can maybe give more answer than I can for that. I mean, I think it's quite US specific as well. I mean, I think, it's a very niche area in terms of the world in generally. In record management, obviously, it's not, but it's a great thing to be studying, and these qualifications are give you credibility, and that will be great when you come to look for roles and on your CV. I think the only thing I would say is that, we are living in a world of change and, constantly evolving. And I hate to use the word, AI and everything that's coming up, but that will impact, I'm sure, records management and archives in the future. I don't know how, but one of the things you might want to think about is, digital preservation. I'm sure that's probably part of your course anyway, but looking how, those sorts of what is the future of this, and how am I going to prepare myself for the future? And I think that's what everybody anybody sensible does in any field. But I can't give you specific examples of what I think is in that field. But I think if you, use your time when you're studying to talk to your lecturers and talk to the people that you're with as to where is this field going, maybe even do one of your essays on it. I don't know how it works, but I think getting aware of it yourself and then is the essential preparation. I don't know what you think, Kim, if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think you brought it up earlier on, is to stay curious and to keep learning.
Mm.
For myself, fun fact, I'm a parent of a soon to be 10-year-old, and she's been learning Mandarin. And so
Hmm.
I've been sitting in with her every other week just to learn this new language. And it's been tough because our brains as adults are not as malleable or even, like sponge-like as we were younger, but it's important to keep up with learning and being comfortable with not knowing what you don't know. And I think for this person studying archives and records management, don't just limit your learning in the classroom. Like I said, when I first started in the industry, and even now, 3 years in, I'm constantly reaching out to folks and learning from you all. I reached out to Susan on LinkedIn. I reached out to a couple folks at Microsoft recently because I was taking part in their Microsoft Learn challenge. I don't know if anyone is aware, but Microsoft is currently doing an AI Skills Fest challenge that ends by the end of the month. And so it's a fun way to gamify learning and education. And so keeping that open mind, keeping that flexibility to keep learning is important for sure as we evolve.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so let me stop here because we have some live Q&A.
Hmm.
Dennis asked, are you familiar with knowledge management? If so, how does this play into the records management area?
Uh, well, yes, I'm familiar with it. I'm not an expert in it by any means, and I worked with colleagues when I was at Shell who are very much experts in it and understand the concepts, but I know it's a particular field in itself. So the way that we saw this was basically it's part of records management. I mean, depends, of course, in your business and or organization how you define what a record is. But in a business like Shell, we defined anything that was legally required or regulated information as a record, and anything that was valuable to the business. So in Shell, it was also it was a record. If it was knowledge that you needed to keep for the business, and let's face it, it was an engineering company, lots of knowledge and lots of long-term information, and we had a category in our retention schedule that we would label it and keep it as records and manage it through its life cycle in that way. So I think they play into each other very nicely in a business sense like that. In other contexts, they might be slightly different, but I can only talk to the context that I've met. But I think very aligned and similar, very much overlapping.
Yeah, I think for knowledge management, especially, and the next question may play into this a little bit that I'm seeing, but we are in an age where we're drowning in data, we're drowning in information, but we're starving for true insights or knowledge.
Mm,
And I think as records managers and information managers, we have this opportunity to filter out the noise and really bring up that nugget of knowledge and managing that knowledge for the organization to then make decisions.
mm.
And so I think from my perspective, that's how records management and knowledge management kind of interplay a little bit. But great question, Dennis. Thank you for
Mm.
asking it. Next question from Frank. How do you manage the concept of data versus records? Records, not data, granular level in the US tend to be what's regulated. I can jump in a little bit, obviously not from a legal or technical perspective here, but why don't you take this one first?
Yeah, well, it sort of touches. I mean, all you'll get from me is very pragmatic, practical answers. But having dealt with this from in a pragmatic way at the company I was in. And so, from a business perspective, data records are all kind of just the same things, but on a different place on the spectrum. So, in a business that deals with both unstructured information, so we're talking Word documents, PowerPoints, all of that, and structured data, for example, in ERP systems and all of SAP and all of that, we basically had the view that a record is based on its content. It is based on what it is rather than what format it's in. So we didn't make a great distinction from a compliance perspective anyway around data and records. So data systems like our SAP systems and all our systems that had held records, we used to call where they're called a system of record if they have data in them that met the value. So lots of finance systems, for example, had data in them that met the definition of a finance record, and they would have to have what we called a records management approach to make sure that data was kept in a records appropriate way. So I kept its integrity and was disposed on the right time and all of that. So, and I personally think that from a pragmatic business perspective, that's the easiest way to deal with it, and not see them as particularly different from a compliance perspective anyway. Obviously, in a regulated government organization, that might not be possible because there's lots of, rules. There are in the UK what public bodies can do and should do with records and from a historical perspective. And records have a very particular meaning. But from the business perspective that I was in, that's how we kind of viewed it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just to bring it all together, I think this is, we mentioned this is the time for records managers and information managers to shine because data versus records versus information are now converging in this perfect storm. And I like to use the analogy of building or renovating a home. The data are the building bricks, brick by brick, you're building things. You want to have a strong foundation because then the records are kind of the different rooms you want to decorate. Is it a paint job, or is it complete, breaking down of the data silos or whatever it is that you want to bring together? And then information governance is really the whole home and how everything is brought together.
Mm.
And so, thank you, Frank, for that question. Let's move on to Asan. what are the key benefits of having a well-defined AI strategy in place prior to implementing AI governance frameworks?
Yeah, well, of course, I would say it depends what you mean by an AI strategy. But I'm I'm going to take it to mean like a sort of policy or what what the company stands for in terms of AI. And I would say that it's the first thing you need really in terms of your AI approach. It's essential to know what is your company's approach, strategy, policy on AI. And most importantly, that has to link to your business objectives. So, for example, you should sort of look at what are your objectives, what's the mission, what's the strategy of the company, and how does AI align with that mission and its values, and also support the strategy? I think those two things are very, very linked. And I think that that then forms the basis of your AI governance framework as to what you want, what you'll use your AI for. If your AI policy says we're not going to use this for employees, then you're not, that's clear then, isn't it? Your governance doesn't will then support that in the policy. I don't think you can do it the other way around. It's pretty fundamental to know where you're going, what you're intending to do with AI before you implement the framework, because it all is going to link back to that.
Yeah, I love that reminder because I think too, ahead of even having an AI strategy or AI governance, a lot of our customers are finding that in preparing to deploy or pilot AI, their data strategy, first and foremost,
Mm,
is not up to snuff, up to par.
mm,
And so, really starting with that data strategy and making any changes to that or any adjustments to that to then be prepared for an AI strategy is really important because then your data governance framework will help feed and manage your AI governance as well.
mm,
Um, this is great. Okay. Thank you, Asan, for your question. We have time for probably one more question, if that's okay, Susan.
mm.
Um,
There's one on I think on certifications and that. So
okay. So it looks like
yeah.
Patrick said disregard.
Okay.
So we will skip that, but thank you, Patrick, for clarifying that. And parting thoughts. It's crazy how an hour really flew by
Mm,
with you, Susan. I
mm,
think that was kind of the theme of last week too, while we were at
mm.
InfoNext. Just so many conversations. What do I remember? What do I don't remember? So if you could just summarize everything for us.
Yeah, well, everything, gosh. Well, I first of all, I'd say, be pleased with yourselves. This is a hard profession to keep going in. As I say, you really do need resilience. And I did write some things really quickly down. Well, I said I just really quickly what I thought are strengths of our field. We're very resilient. We have to be. We've got an eye for detail because that's required for retention schedules and all the work that we do. We're delivering. We're good at getting things done because that's the nature of our work. We've got experience and are generally embedded in the business and really understand how it operates that others perhaps haven't got that view and perspective. We're flexible and adaptable. We've been through change. We're constantly navigating change. We have to deal with all the divestments and that with records, so we know what change is. And we're disciplined because our subject requires that to be ordered and organized. And we're good at working under pressure, but because everybody's under pressure. But I think there is a pressure on resources and everything. So, I mean, I just came up with those literally in 2 minutes before this thing. There's many more strengths that we've got. So definitely lean into those. And as you say, to go, I'd say do connect the dots and network and make friends, as it says here. AI is a multidisciplinary. It needs diversity, and it definitely needs data governance professionals and quite accountably. I don't think the world's woken up to that yet. I think it will do. And let's make sure, but let's make it wake up quicker. Yeah, review your strategy and your AI governance, your information strategy, and link up with the people that are doing the AI strategy and with the business. All those three things need to sort of like live in harmony together, and that's where again you can add value. Yeah, I mean, explain that AI is here to stay. Don't be afraid of it. It feels daunting, and don't get to phobo, I think you said, Kim. You can be a victim in this world and kind of let things happen to you, or you can be a player. Personally, I tend to kind of have to absorb things when change happens to me and it's unexpected, and I probably go into a little bit of self-reflection for as long as it takes, perhaps even a few days, a week, or whatever. But then it's done, and then I'm like, right, okay, I'm going to own this and control it. And I think, we all operate in different ways, but definitely taking control is a good thing to do, whatever that means, in as little ways as possible. And yeah, don't AI is about reinventing the wheel. It's not about reinventing the wheel. You're the person probably in your organization that knows a lot about where things happen. And that I think is a really key thing that they're going to need when it comes to joining up all these dots for AI. So definitely make the most of that.
I love that. And someone actually shared privately that they took their first AI training in 1986.
Yeah.
And it was very
It's not
interesting.
new, is it?
Obviously,
I know. That's
yeah,
good.
everything has changed. But I think, again, if you're not learning on your own, but learning together is also important and motivating.
Mm,
And that's what I love most about events and conferences. And we have a couple of events that Gimel will be at. Arma Canada is next week, and so we're excited to see all of those folks there. I was born and raised in Canada, so shout out to my Canadians.
mhm,
And then next month we'll be at Arma, New Jersey, Inform 25. Nagara, shout out to Nagara. We will be in Oklahoma City in July, and Arma, Greater California. And so we will be in various places, not we, Susan and I, but our
mhm,
team here at Gimel. Susan will be speaking at a bunch of other conferences as well, including Microsoft roundtables and such. And then for those who will be at Arma InfoCon in Phoenix, we're excited to see you all. Ways to stay connected with Susan um, via email. Her email is here, and also LinkedIn. She is available for consultations for organizations and teams who are looking to deploy AI or getting ready for AI from a strategy perspective, but especially governance perspective. She is also a certified career coach and is open and available for anyone who has questions around their careers, whether you're pivoting or wanting to start a new project, initiative, or industry. And so, thank you again, Susan.
mm.
I so
Thank you for having
appreciate
me.
so appreciate you. So appreciate your insights and experiences. I've learned a lot, and it was kind of a therapy session in a way too.
Yeah. Sorry
Thank you
about that.
for that. No, no, not sorry. This is really great and much needed.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank
It's
you
really
all.
great. Thank you for having me. It's really good to see. So do if you see me at any events, do say hello. I'd love to meet you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Great rest of the week.